Today we're diving into something pretty heavy, I guess you could say. Planning for end-of-life care, specifically in the context of dementia.
Hmm.
And luckily, we have some great expertise to help us break it down
Yeah.
and make it, a little less daunting to think about. So by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more equipped to understand, the process, the decisions that kind of come with it,
Right.
and how to even begin to have those conversations.
Absolutely. It's really about empowerment, isn't it? Instead of shying away from these conversations, it's like you said, giving yourself the knowledge to approach them with clarity, but also compassion.
Exactly. And one thing that really stuck with me from the material that you sent over was the idea of dementia as a journey, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily about dwelling on the negative or being scared, but it's about understanding, okay, there might be some turns along the way.
Hmm.
How can we prepare for them?
I think that's a really helpful analogy. And it's important to remember that each journey is different. There's no roadmap, set in stone.
Right. So how do we even begin to talk about this with our families then? I mean, it's got to feel so daunting to even, bring it up.
I think that's why a lot of families avoid it. It's the fear of upsetting someone you love, right? Or maybe facing a reality that you're just not ready for. But the thing is, starting early before the disease progresses too far can actually be a more compassionate approach in the long run.
So, okay, it makes sense. But how do you even start?
I always say it's less about having all the answers and more about trying to understand the person's values, what matters most to them, what brings them joy, what are their hopes, what are their fears.
So instead of jumping right to the medical decisions,
Hmm.
you're saying it's about the person's overall well-being and what they value in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a family and they realized that their mother, who was in the early stages, what she really valued more than anything was her independence and her social connections.
Okay.
So instead of, immediately thinking about moving her into a care facility, they focused on how can we support her staying in her home and how can we help her maintain those connections for as long as possible.
That's a great example because it really shows how important it is to, tailor our approach to the individual person and their priorities.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us to something that a lot of families struggle with, and that's understanding that dementia is a terminal illness.
Right. That's definitely a difficult reality for a lot of people to face. So it's understandable that, some would just avoid even thinking about it.
Totally. But I think facing it head on can be more empowering for families to make decisions that are both informed and compassionate.
What do you mean by informed and compassionate decisions?
Well, a lot of times families might see a symptom like, loss of mobility or swallowing difficulties or even like vulnerability to infections. And they see those as like separate problems to fix.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to understand that those are all part of the brain's decline. They're part of the progression of the disease itself.
So instead of looking at it like separate things to fix, we need to understand those symptoms within, the bigger context of the disease progressing.
Exactly. And when we do that, it kind of shifts our focus from just prolonging life to ensuring quality of life.
This is where it gets interesting. So you touched on this a sensitive topic of dementia being terminal. How can understanding that really help families make those really difficult decisions about care in the future?
Well, it helps us consider what truly matters to that person in their final chapter, right? For instance, a lot of people think that feeding tubes will prolong life significantly, but that's not always the case.
So it's not just about holding on to any medical intervention we can, but it's about aligning our choices with what that person would consider a good life.
Yes. And that good life can look different for everybody.
Right.
And what we assume someone wants or needs can change as they go through the stages of dementia.
Right. So you're saying it's about adapting.
Yeah, I often ask families to think about this. What would be worse than death for your loved one?
Wow, that's a tough one. I imagine it brings up a lot for people.
It does, and it forces them to move past their own fears or desires and really think, what would this person with dementia want? Would they want to be surrounded by loved ones, even if they might not recognize them? Or would they want comfort and freedom from pain, even if that means letting go of certain treatments?
You're basically saying it's about prioritizing what they would want.
Yeah, and using that to guide how we make decisions.
So essentially, we're shifting our focus from just extending life at all costs to ensuring a good quality of life based on their values and wishes.
Exactly. And this is where advanced care planning comes in. It's more than just filling out forms.
Advanced care planning, I've heard that term, but what does it really mean?
It's about having those open and honest conversations early on with your loved ones about what they want for their future care.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of environment would they want to be in? What matters most to them in terms of comfort and quality of life?
So it's really about starting a dialogue, not just checking boxes.
Exactly. And this should involve the person with dementia, if possible, their family, and their healthcare providers. It's a team effort to understand and honor what they want.
Makes sense, but you said it's more than just forms. Are there specific documents or conversations we should be having?
There are things like a durable power of attorney for healthcare or a living will can be so helpful in making sure those wishes are respected, even if the person can no longer communicate them directly.
Okay, can you break down what those documents are a little more?
Sure. A durable power of attorney for healthcare basically designates someone to make medical decisions if the person becomes incapacitated. It should be someone they trust completely and who really gets their values and wishes.
So it's like having an advocate to make sure their voice is heard, even if they can't speak for themselves.
Exactly. And a living will that outlines what they want in specific situations, like end-of-life care.
Got it. So it just makes it clear what they would have wanted.
Yes. It can be so helpful for families making those really tough choices, provides clarity and guidance when things are super emotional, but it shouldn't replace those ongoing conversations. Advanced care planning is not a one-time thing. It's a process.
This is all so helpful, and I love how you're really hitting on the importance of communication, of really understanding someone's values in order to make good decisions.
Yeah, it's about moving away from what we think is best and instead really focusing on what the person with dementia would want.
You've given us so much to think about. I want to give our listeners a chance to digest everything we've talked about so far. What surprised you? What challenged your assumptions? Take a minute and jot down some thoughts, and we'll be back soon to continue this deep dive. And we're back. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of process everything we talked about. It's heavy stuff, but it's all about, equipping ourselves.
Yeah.
Getting that knowledge so we can approach this whole journey, with more clarity and compassion.
Absolutely. And it's okay to admit that these conversations can be tough emotionally.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel overwhelmed or uncertain or maybe even resistant to the whole thing.
Right. You're reminding us that this is a human experience.
Right.
It's not just a medical or legal process.
Exactly. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just acknowledge those feelings and offer support.
Yeah, for sure. So before the break, we were talking about advanced care planning, and you mentioned those legal documents, like the durable power of attorney for healthcare and the living will.
Yeah, and those are super important, but there's another part of advanced care planning that I see families kind of trip up on.
Oh, interesting. What's that?
It's the way we ask family members about end-of-life care. A lot of times families will ask, what do you want us to do for your mother?
That seems like, a caring question. What's wrong with that?
Well, it puts a lot of pressure on the person you're asking. They feel like they have to make these huge decisions.
Oh, I see.
Without really knowing what their loved one actually wants.
So then they end up making choices based on what they think is best.
Yeah, not on what the person with dementia would have actually chosen for themselves.
And that could lead to some tough feelings down the road.
Yeah, guilt, doubt, it can be hard. So it's about framing these conversations in a way that respects a person's wishes, but also takes the pressure off the family.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Instead of saying, what do you want us to do for your mother? Try asking, knowing your mother, what do you think she would want in this situation?
Wow. That little change in wording is huge, right? Because it puts the focus on the person with dementia, what they value, even as their cognitive abilities are declining.
Exactly. And it gives families the power to make decisions based on what their loved one would have wanted, not based on their own fears.
It all goes back to having these conversations early.
Yes. Before it becomes a crisis.
Before it becomes a crisis. Right, because it's not about, trying to predict the future.
No.
It's about understanding their values, hopes, fears, what matters most to them.
Exactly. It's like creating a roadmap, but not a strict itinerary.
Love that. Because, like dementia, life rarely follows a straight path.
Right. There are always going to be detours, unexpected turns, and we have to be ready to adapt.
So how can we, as family members or caregivers, prepare ourselves for those unexpected turns?
Well, one way is to know what resources are out there to support families going through this. There are amazing organizations, support groups, even palliative care specialists. They can offer guidance and comfort and even just practical help.
I think that's huge because a lot of people just feel lost and alone when they're dealing with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes just talking to other people who are going through the same thing, that can be so powerful.
Right, just knowing you're not alone.
Exactly. And, I work with families all the time, and I've heard so many stories that just stick with me.
Oh, yeah.
Stories that show how important it is to really understand and honor a person's wishes. There was this one family, their mom, she was an artist her whole life, amazing artist. But she had moderate dementia, and she couldn't really paint in the traditional way anymore.
That's heartbreaking.
It was, but her family found these creative ways for her to keep expressing herself artistically.
Oh, wow, what'd they do?
They got her these big sheets of paper and finger paints.
Oh, right.
That way she could explore color and texture without having to use brushes or anything, with those fine motor skills.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing. Her face would light up, and she created these beautiful pieces. They were abstract, but they were so full of life.
That's amazing. What a great example of how joy and creativity can still be there even with dementia. Really changes how you think about what a good life looks like.
It does. It reminds us that it's not about holding on to the past or trying to make things the way they used to be. It's about meeting the person where they are at.
Right, and supporting them.
Yes, and nurturing their spirit.
However we can.
Yeah, in whatever way we can. And sometimes those ways are unexpected, right? I remember another family, their dad was a musician his whole life. Loved music, couldn't play his instruments anymore. His family, they were devastated, but they found out he still responded to music.
I bet. So what did they do?
They started playing his favorite music. It was like a light switch. He would tap his feet and hum along, sometimes even conduct with his hands. The music was still getting through.
That's beautiful.
Even though he couldn't make it himself anymore. These stories are so inspiring.
They are.
They remind us that even with all the loss, you can still connect with someone.
Yeah.
Experience joy with them. Find meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we need to approach this with curiosity, with openness.
Yes.
Be willing to adapt. Find new ways to help our loved ones.
Exactly. I want to give everyone a chance to reflect again. What really stuck with you from those stories? What new ideas do you have? Jot down your thoughts. We'll be back to wrap things up soon.
We're back, and I hope everyone had a chance to just, think about those stories.
Mm-hmm.
They really make you realize that even with dementia, you can still find connection and joy and meaning.
It's amazing, right? How resilient people can be. It makes you look beyond just the limitations and see that a good life is still possible.
Yeah, for sure. And it reminds us that, we need to be open to new possibilities and adapt as things change.
Absolutely. We can't get stuck in the past or try to force things to be how they used to be.
Right. We got to meet people where they are now.
Right now, support them, nurture their spirit, and do it in a way that works for them in this moment.
You've shared so much with us today, but if you had to pick one piece of advice to leave our listeners with, what would it be?
You are not alone. So many families go through this. And there's help out there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask for it.
Okay.
Whether it's support groups or counselors or palliative care specialists or even just your friends and family, they can offer support and guidance.
It's so important. It's easy to feel lost and alone when you're dealing with this.
I know, and it's okay if you don't have all the answers. Or if you feel uncertain, or if you're grieving. Ask for help.
You're saying it's okay to be human.
It is. This is all about love, isn't it? It's about honoring the people we love, respecting their wishes, making sure their final chapter is as peaceful as possible.
So as we wrap up today, I want to encourage everyone listening. Start talking to your loved ones about this.
Yes.
Do your research, find those resources that can help you. Because even though this is challenging, there's still love and there's still hope.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into end-of-life care and dementia. We hope you found it helpful.
Yeah.
And remember, even with the tough stuff, there's still love and there's still hope.